6. A sound drew Mia out of sleep. Dawn shined through the speckles of the window, glinting off the silver sticks of her cage. She remembered where she was. An angry grunt made her sit upright. Miss Potter was crouched over the rabbit's cage. There now, the woman said, sleeping on her handskins. No use in fussing. Mia's heart started to thrum in her throat. Miss Potter reached into the rabbit's cage and hefted him out by his floppy ears. His legs kicked, his heart thumped, his breath ruffled. Normally, the sounds would fill Mia with hunger, but right then it made every one of her hairs stand on end. It's okay, Miss Potter cooed to the struggling rabbit. It will all be okay soon. She took the brown jar from the tree trunk, along with the loose white something. The cloth, Mia realized. With one hand, Miss Potter opened the jar and tipped it onto the cloth. A scent wafted through the den. It tickled Mia's nostrils, making her head feel woozy, her eyelids heavy. Here we are, Miss Potter said. She pressed the damp cloth over the rabbit's nose while turning her head away. The rabbit made a muffled grunting. His legs kicked. His heart thumped faster and faster as his gaze frantically searched the room. He found Mia. She watched in horror as the rabbit's eyelids slowly drifted shut and his legs fell limp. When Miss Potter removed the cloth, his breath was gone, along with his heartbeat. Oh, the woman said with a bit of heartbreak. I do hate it when they make those little sounds. She laid out the rabbit's body and picked up the silver claw. Mia looked away just as his stomach opened wetly. The room thickened with the steamy red scent, making her teeth clack. But whether out of fear or hunger, she wasn't sure. She looked up through her cage at the fox with the sandy whiskers. The rabbit had been right. Mr. Todd was an empty shell. Miss Potter had trapped his soul inside a page, and then stolen his eyes and stuffed his body with grass. Mia's heart beat in her ears now. She looked back just as Miss Potter lifted the dripping insides of the rabbit, streams of blood running down her arms. Phew, the woman said. She opened the window with her elbow and then slopped the bunny's innards outside. Mia pressed her nose through her cage, sniffing at the trees, the wind, the soil. This was it. She needed to escape. Otherwise, she'd end up just like Mr. Todd and the rabbit. She could almost feel the cold of the silver claw opening her belly. She gnawed at the silver sticks of the cage, trying to get them to snap, but it was no use. The bunny's innards disposed of, Mr. Potter summoned a small waterfall and cleaned the blood from her hands. Then she stepped to what looked like a black boulder and picked up a small stick. There came a brisk scratch, and a flame gasped to life, tingling Mia's nostrils. Fire. The human could make fire. Miss Potter grew distracted, using the waterfall to fill a pot big enough for Mia to fit inside. Mia watched as the flame crept down the stick to Miss Potter's fingers. The woman hissed like a snake, jerking her hand, and the flame leaped onto the floor. Eek, eek, eek! Miss Potter cried, stepping on the fire until it was extinguished. She went to the window and waved the smoke out with her hand. When that didn't clear it, she opened the front door, wafting fresh air into the den. Miss Potter wiped the sweat from her forehead. Oh, Beatrix, she said, laughing. You really can be such a goose sometimes. You're meant to cook the rabbit, not yourself. The smoke cleared, and she shut the door and the window. Now all that was left was the trapped air, laced with ash. Mia's nose ached to sniff the trees again. Miss Potter scratched another flame to life and touched it to the boulder, which whooshed with a circle of fire. She lifted the water-filled pot over it, and soon steam coiled. Once the water started to bubble, Miss Potter dropped the rabbit's empty skin inside. She created another fire and tossed his glistening meat over it. The room filled with eye-watering smells. A hunger growled up inside Mia. Try as she might to fight it. The rabbit's meat would fill her with energy. She might even be strong enough to break these silver sticks. She paced her cage, whimpering and licking her lips. Enough fidgeting, little miss. Miss Potter said. "Your breakfast is coming." Once the meat had grown crisp and glistening, the woman served it to herself. Then she walked to Mia's cage and opened it with a creak. "Here's your oatmeal." She set a shell of pale burbling mud next to Mia and then closed the door. Mia sniffed at the oatmeal, then sneezed. It was as scentless as mud, just like she would become if she ate it. As Miss Potter feasted on the rabbit's meat, making satisfied sounds and slurping the fat from her fingers, Mia tucked herself into a bowl in the corner of her cage. She had disobeyed her mom and not gone into the forest when she was supposed to, and now she would pay the price. Miss Potter would steal her scent, then her essence, then her breath and her skin. The woman would feast on Mia's meat while Mia watched helpless from a leaf-flat watercolor world. The rabbit eaten, Miss Potter cleaned the grease from her hands in the small waterfall and then impaled a new page above the rabbit's empty cage. "There!" she exclaimed. "The story of a fierce bad rabbit. It's far from my best work, but it will pay the bills." She used a stick to fish out the rabbit's skin from the steaming pot, and then opened the front door and hung it to dry. Mia stared at the new drawing above the empty cage. The rabbit with the fluffy ears fled through the flat world in terror, forever running from some unseen danger. Whatever it was had stolen his tail and whiskers. Mia could have sworn she saw the drawing's nose twitch. 7. Night fell, and a spindly moon rose in the window. Mia pretended to sleep while Miss Potter blew out the tiny flames around the room. Footsteps approached the cage, and then the latch squeaked open. Miss Potter clicked her tongue. What a waste! She removed the uneaten oatmeal and then closed the latch again. She hadn't noticed that one of Mia's eyes was not perfectly shut. Once Miss Potter was safely tucked away in her room, Mia sat up. A silver of moonlight gleamed on the cage's silver latch. She'd watched through the crack in her eyelid as Miss Potter had opened it. All Mia had to do was lift. She poked her nose through the square directly below the latch and tried to nuzzle it upward, but the space was too tight. The silver sticks cut her muzzle. She pulled her nose out to lick the ache away and realized something. She slid her nose back into the square and licked. Her tongue lifted the latch. The cage creaked open, and Mia hunched, waiting to see if the sound had woken Miss Potter. Snoring drifted from the other room. Mia bounded out of the cage and crept across the floor, nails clicking as she sniffed for an escape. Mr. Todd's glowing eyes seemed to follow her around the room. "Stop staring at me," she whispered to him. She padded to the den's entrance. Its latch was much too high to lick open, so she sniffed the narrow space around its edges. She could smell squirrels and acorns and leaves and streams. The breath of the forest was a whisker away, but she couldn't figure out how to reach it. She caught an apple scent, and her tail started to wag. "Yow!" Mia said, making the smallest yelp she could. A few moments later, a sniffing came from under the door. "Mia?" "Mom!" She could smell her mom's breath through the crack beneath the door. The same air pulled between their nostrils. "Oh, thank goodness," her mom said, sobbing with relief. "You're alive. I'm sorry. It took me so long to find you. I moved slowly on 3 paws. Are you okay?" "She's gonna take my skin," Mia said. "She's gonna cook me and replace my eyes and trap me in one of those pages." "Slow down, honey. You can tell me all about it later. Right now, we need to get you out of there." Mia scratched at the door, whimpering. "This is the only way out. The rabbit told me before, Miss Potter, before she took his—" "It's going to be okay, Mia," her mom said, but Mia could hear panic in her voice. "Can you reach that hole? I can't jump with my injured paw." Mia looked at the window. Maybe the rabbit hadn't been right about everything. The window was as invisible as a fly's wing. Wings could be crunched. She trotted to the space where Miss Potter had skinned the rabbit. She fixed her eyes on the moon in the window and, bounding across the room, made a great leap. Thump! Her nose struck the wall just beneath the window, surprising a yelp out of her. She recovered and crouched in the shadows of the skin tree, muzzle aching, ears alert. Miss Potter snored in her room. Mia decided to try again, this time pushing the air out of her lungs so she wouldn't make a sound. She ran and leaped and thumped. She pawed at her bruised muzzle and then returned to the door. My legs aren't long enough. Her mom took a breath. Can you find another way out? Mia sniffed. The only other place was down the hall, in the dark space where Miss Potter went to sleep. I can try, Mia said, breath shaking. I'll be right here, her mom said. The door to Miss Potter's room was open just a crack. Mia nuzzled it wider and sniffed the darkness. The woman snoozed softly. There was no window. Mia was about to go back, but then shapes started to form in the shadows. Claws, fangs, glowing eyes. The room was filled with dead animals, frozen in hideous poses, eyes popping out of their empty skins. Mia recognized the characters from Miss Potter's pages. There weren't the squirrel, the duck, and the bullfrog. There was the badger, claws in the air, jaws locked in an eternal hiss. And there was Sarah, the rabbit's wife, eyes sparkling with never-ending fear. Trembling, Mia backed up. Her tail bumped into something, knocking an object to the ground, where it shattered. Hump! The sound stirred Miss Potter, who sat bolt upright. She snatched something from her bedside and clicked it, and a beam of light blared across the room, nearly catching Mia's tail as she slipped out of the door. Mia leaped into her cage and caught the door with her teeth. She yanked back, and the latch clicked shut just as the woman stomped into the room. The light shined on Mia, making her squint. Mia! Mia's mom called from outside. Mia, tell me you're okay. Miss Potter pointed her light out the window. Who's making that racket? Mia's mom fell silent. Miss Potter killed the light with a click, scratched her chin, and returned to her room. Mia trembled in her cage, the image of the empty-eyed creatures still wild in her mind, and not only because they were stuffed. The duck had wings for flying, the badger had jaws for chomping, even Sarah had long legs for kicking, and yet none of them were able to escape before Miss Potter stole their essence and their skins. What chance did a fox kid have? 8. The sun rose and set in the window more times than Mia could count. The days blended together in a stale blur, slowly leaching the terror from her heart and replacing it with something she'd never felt before, boredom. Every morning, Miss Potter swept into the room, wafting her melt flower scent and talking to herself. Make the tea, make the tea. After the water howled in pain, she would throw open the window to let the weather in. Mia would smell her mom outside, patiently waiting for the night to come. As sunlight filled the human den, Miss Potter would use the silver claw to sharpen her pencils, and then sit before Mia's cage, screeching shapes onto her pages. Screech, screech, screech. I've always said that one must see, smell, and touch one's subject. Screech, screech. Ahem, well, perhaps not smell. Not when one's subject is a skunk or a badger or some scandalous character like that. Screech! Still, I've always said to myself, Beatrix, you must know how fog smells, how frost tastes, before you draw it. Day after day, as Mia watched her own form take shape on the page, she thought she could feel her personality slowly seeping out of her paws. In the afternoons, Miss Potter placed what looked like clear puddles over her eyes and studied her work. These are turning out quite well, if I do say so myself, and ahead of deadline too. I should be finished with you in just a few more days. Mia tried not to think about what this meant. Instead, she lay on her side and watched the branches scratch at the window, trying to remember what it felt like to curl up beneath them. As the sky began to fade, Miss Potter would serve herself duck or rabbit, and Mia a steaming bowl of oatmeal. The smell of sizzling meat squeezed Mia's stomach until she was forced to take tiny licks at the tasteless mud, choking down every last bit. In the evening, Miss Potter would shut the window, cutting off the wind and the leaves and Mia's mom's apple scent. Then she would light a fire in the small cave, putting a flicker in Mr. Todd's eyes. "Well, I'm spent," Miss Potter would say once the flames had faded to embers. "Good night, little miss. Sleep tight." With that, she would slip into her room, and Mia would be left alone with the moon and the shadows and Mr. Todd's glowing gaze. When all was quiet, she would leak open the latch and lie by the door, and her mother would whisper soothing things through the cracks while Mia pretended not to hear the tears in her voice. 9. And finished! Miss Potter sang out one evening. She sat in front of Mia's cage, only this time she did not bring her pencil to scratch with. Instead, she brought several pages, which she had tapped into a neat pile on her lap. "This is only a rough draft, mind. I'm still working out the details." She studied the pages. "I didn't quite get your eyes right. I'm afraid you always look so dour." She took a deep breath, then held up the first page. It showed a picture of Mia. Only like the other watercolor animals, she stood on her hind paws. She carried a little nest filled with strawberries and wore a fluffy dress like the ones Miss Potter wore. A soft white something covered her head, save her ears, which stuck out the top. Miss Potter cleared her throat and spoke in a pinched voice. In the Northlands, there was a valley of fog most white, with the golden tops of trees poking through. And in those trees lived a young fox kid. Her name was Little Miss. Mia tried folding her paws over her ears, but they kept springing up. Had the fox with the glowing eyes listened to the tale of Mr. Todd? Was this the last thing he ever did? Miss Potter proceeded to tell the tale of a young vixen, whose two naughty brothers were always getting into trouble. After the brothers snuck onto a farm to hassle some chickens, the angry old farmer swore to shoot off their tails. The word stirred something in Mia, and she tilted an ear. The clever little miss managed to convince the farmer that the blood on her brother's muzzles was nothing more than strawberry jam. In the end, the farmer left, scratching his head, and the fox kids made it home in time for their parents to lick their cheeks good night. "The end," Miss Potter said, turning over the last page. She bared her teeth at Mia. "And now, little miss, you shall live forever, in the hearts and minds of children everywhere." Mia sniffed at the pages. Maybe living in the watercolor world wouldn't be so bad. She could remain in a story where she saved her siblings from the evils of the world until the end of time, just as she feared she'd fail to do in the Ivy Wood. "Well," Miss Potter said, "what did you think? It may not be as exciting as the old tales with Peter, but I enjoy it. And to think we turned the tricksy fox into a hero." She wrinkled her nose in that way Mia had come to learn was in a snarl. "I think someone deserves a treat." She went to the kitchen and then brought back a raw piece of meat, which she tossed into the cage. Mia stared at it. Had this belonged to the rabbit? "Well," Miss Potter said, "go on then." Mia sniffed at the meat. She didn't touch it. "Grown used to my oatmeal, have you?" Mr. Potter said. "Good. Hunters are such nasty characters." She removed the meat and sighed. Well, no use in avoiding the inevitable. She collected the cloth and the jar and the silver claw, blowing away the pencil dust. Then she reached for the skin tree, paused, and frowned around the room. "Now, where have my gloves run up to?" She disappeared into her bedroom. Mia licked open the cage's latch and bounded to the door. "Mom," she howled, "you have to save me. She's going to do it right now." A moment later, her mom scratched at the door. "What can I do? I don't know what to do." Mia whimpered. Her mom was supposed to have all the answers. Mia searched the house, thinking. The window was too high. The door was blocked. Miss Potter had taken the sleeping liquid with her. Then she saw the answer. A minute later, Miss Potter swept back into the room, pulling on her gloves. I heard your whimpering, little miss, and I am sorry about this, but there's no use in making it any more difficult than it already is. When she turned around, Mia was back in her cage. Miss Potter poured the sleeping liquid over the cloth and then opened the cage with the gloved hand. Mia tried to leap out, but the woman caught her by the scruff, making Mia's spine bend and her paws dangled helplessly. Miss Potter frowned. Just know that I'm no happier about it than you are. She pressed the cloth over Mia's muzzle and looked away. The woozy scent shot up Mia's nose. Her eyes watered over. The walls started to melt and bend. Just before everything fell to darkness, the smell was gone. What's this? Miss Potter said in a high-pitched voice. She dropped Mia, half-conscious, back in her cage and closed it. Mia was barely able to keep her heavy eyelids open, but she watched through blurry lashes as Miss Potter went to her desk and picked up a drawing of Little Miss. A stream of pee trickled off it, smearing the pencil work. What happened? Miss Potter said, horrified. She searched the room for the culprit, never dreaming that Mia could have let herself out of her cage and then put herself back. Mia wanted to howl to her mom to let her know that she was still alive, but she could barely stay awake. Her head full of stones, she couldn't feel her paws. Her eyelids kept drifting shut without her permission. Miss Potter let out a frustrated sound as she crumpled the paper and threw it in the trash. Well, she said, cleaning her hands in the small waterfall and then violently flicking droplets from her fingers. I suppose we'll have to start over tomorrow. She went to the light switch and scowled at Mia's cage. Get a good night's sleep, little miss, and do try not to look so dour in the morning. She flicked off the light and then disappeared into her room. There was a scratching at the door. Mia, her mom howled. Are you there? What did she do to you? Mia tried to swim out of sleep, but the walls couldn't hold their shape. The silver sticks wavered in and out of focus. Her eyes fell shut again. Mia, her mom said, scratching. Mia jerked awake. She needed to lick open the latch. She needed to let her mom know she was still alive, but she couldn't lift her head. Her tongue hung heavy in her mouth. Mia, please answer me. As the half-moon fell behind the trees, Mia's mom began to sob. Her mom couldn't smell her, couldn't hear her. She thought Mia was nothing more than skin and pencil etchings. After a long silence, her mom scratched at the door one last time. I love you, Mia. And Mia could do nothing except lie and listen as her mom said a tearful, howling goodbye, and then hopped off into the night. Mia's heart beat too slow to break. That night, Mia had a watercolor nightmare. She stood in the ivy wood on her hind paws, holding a nest of peaches and centipedes. She was looking for her siblings so she could feed them. A yelp echoed through the wood as Roa sprinted through the brambles, trying to escape the gooey-eyed misfits. Mia wanted to help her brother, but her paws wouldn't move. Even her whiskers refused to twitch. All she could do was stand and watch as Roa ran for his life, her teeth bared in a frozen smile. 10. What a lovely morning, Miss Potter said, bursting into the room the next day. Mia lay in her cage. Her head was still woozy from the sleeping cloth, but it was her broken heart that kept her from getting up. Her mom had left her for dead. I was thinking, little miss, Miss Potter said, whisking around the room, collecting her pencil and paper. Because we have to start over again, this might be the perfect opportunity to really get the story right. To return to the good old days when my books were urgent and frightening and sold like hotcakes. Mia didn't budge. Maybe her mom had been right to leave her. Mia may have saved herself a few days by peeing on those pictures, but she still couldn't open the front door. Miss Potter grabbed the silver claw and sharpened a pencil. We'll get back to Once Upon a Time and Happily Ever After. Why, this latest project has the potential to be even more popular than Peter. Her face crumpled. She dropped the pencil and the silver claw and then hid in her hands. Her body shuddered with sobs, and she collapsed into a chair. Mia was so startled she sat upright. Miss Potter recovered with a sniff. Her eyes glistened as she spun a circle of silver around a finger. Who am I kidding? I gave up unhappily ever after when my Mr. Warren died. Her breath caught. Oh, Norman. She dabbed at her face, smearing the blueberry tint from her eyes and smudging the red on her lips. Mia smelled the woman's salty tears and wondered if she, too, had lost her Dan. Miss Potter ran her finger along Mia's cage. Perhaps you miss someone too, she sniffed. That fox I caught before you? Some would say that's a ridiculous notion, that animals don't have feelings, and yet Miss Fix had warned Mia and her siblings that meeting eyes with another animal would result in a fight, be it with a sibling or a badger. But staring into Miss Potter's eyes made Mia's heart thump with something other than fear. This human seemed as sad as she was. Keeping Mia's gaze, Miss Potter slowly slid her fingers through the silver sticks of the cage. Mia's paw lifted to move, but then came to a rest again. The woman's fingers glided on either side of Mia's ear, and then softly came together. The touch sent a trickle of warmth from her ear right to the hairless tip of her tail. Perhaps I'll make you my pet, Miss Potter whispered. Would you like that? We could keep each other company during the long nights. Mia delicately parted her teeth and gave the woman's fingers a lick. Her skin tasted of milk. Miss Potter smiled sadly. I think I know something that will cheer us both up. She lifted the latch and opened the cage. Mia's ears perked. Was Miss Potter going to let her go? Mia's mom might still be nearby. She could still catch her apple scent. Her paws kneaded the cage, uncertain of whether to jump out or not. Miss Potter went to her bedroom and then returned with the white cloth. Mia pressed into the back of her cage, whimpering. No need for that, little miss, Miss Potter said. It's just a bonnet. Do you know what a bonnet is? Mia didn't. The rabbit had never mentioned it. She didn't dare sniff at the thing, in case it stole her breath again. See, Miss Potter said, poking her fingers through 2 slits in the cloth. These are for your ears. Now hold still. She pressed the cloth close, and Mia turned her nose away, a growling building in her throat. Oh, come now, Miss Potter said. You and I are getting along so well. Besides, it gets drafty in this old house at night. This will keep the warmth in, and you'll look quite handsome. The cloth came closer still, nearly reaching Mia's muzzle. Thoughts overwhelmed her. Miss Potter had changed her mind. She would clamp the cloth over Mia's nose, and Mia's legs would kick and kick until they fell limp and never kicked again. Then Miss Potter would scoop out her insides and replace her eyes with stones, and she'd wake up in a watercolor nightmare, where she'd never see her mom or her real siblings again. That's it, Miss Potter said, pressing the cloth closer. Mia lashed, her fangs staring into Miss Potter's delicate skin. Eee! The woman stumbled backward, the blood streaming down her arm. Mia leaped out of the cage and sprinted to the front door, scratching at it, trying to get it to open. Mom! Mom! She cried. I'm here! I'm alive! Come back! Mia sensed something behind her ears and ducked right before Miss Potter could grab her. She slipped through the woman's skirts and ran into the kitchen. Mia saw the brown jar on the counter. Before Miss Potter could reach it, Mia leaped, knocking the jar with her paws, sending it shattering across the floor. The scent flooded the house, making Mia's head heavily. Her paws started to drag. A hand seized her by the ears. She was yanked painfully upward, yowling over and over again until she was hurled back into her cage. The latch snapped shut. Miss Potter hacked and coughed and waved her hand as she mopped up the spilled liquid. When the last of it was down the sink, she looked at the blood streaming down her arm. She turned and stared at Mia. The woman wore a new face now. Her skin twisted on her skull. The red on her lips was smeared. Her hair long like dead weeds. I see, Miss Potter said in a dark voice. She went to her desk and grabbed little Miss's surviving pages, smearing them with blood. I should never have trusted a predator. Nasty, nasty things. She grabbed a match. I refuse to lead my young readers astray. She lit the match and touched its flame to the pages, making them crackle and burn bright. The pictures of little Miss curled and blackened and then ended in ash. Miss Potter tossed the burning pages into the sink and opened the front door. I'll be back with more ether, she said, and then slammed the door shut. Mia whimpered. She could still taste the woman's blood on her teeth. 11. The sky was still blue when the moon rose pale and full in the window. Now that Mia's pages weren't burned, where would she end up? She imagined her empty skin wandering lonely through the forest, searching for her mom. The skin had no eyes to see, it had no tongue to call out. When the skin remembered that it didn't have a heart to care whether it found its mom or not, it fell to the ground and never got up again. Mia stared through the top of her cage at Mr. Todd. "How do I get out of here?" she whispered. The fox's eyes glowed with dusk. Mia followed his gaze to the rack where Mr. Potter hung her extra skins. What could Mia do with that? She looked back to the fox, and her heart skipped a beat. Had his muzzle turned? Or were the shadows playing tricks? Mr. Todd's eyes seemed to be pointed slightly to the left now. She followed his gaze to the stove. "What are you trying to show me?" she asked, looking from the skin tree to the stove. Mia remembered Miss Potter squawking like a bird after she'd accidentally dropped the match on the floor. The woman may have been able to make fire, but she still feared it. And when the flame leaped where it didn't belong, she had opened the door to let the smoke out. Mia's whiskers ticked up. "Thank you," she whispered to the fox. She licked open the latch. The front door creaked open, and Miss Potter stepped inside, closing it behind her. "They were out of ether," she said. "We'll have to do this the unpleasant way, I suppose." Mia drew her muzzle back into the shadows under the skin tree. Her bag was nestled beneath its arched roots. She waited. There came the hiss of gas, the strike of a match, and a whoosh of flames. Next came the water filling the pot. Then the sharpening of the silver claw, shink, shink, shink. Mia peeked beneath the coast as Miss Potter approached her cage. The woman gasped when she found it empty. "Little Miss?" Miss Potter said. Her steps grew more careful. "Little Miss?" As soon as Miss Potter's toes were pointed away, Mia aimed her nose toward the firelit stove and pushed up on her hind legs, pressing her back into the arched roots of the skin tree. The rack barely budged. Miss Potter huffed. "Where has that little devil got off to?" Mia pressed up again. The rack lifted momentarily, and the skin swayed toward the stove. But then the whole thing rocked back, painfully squishing her tail. Mia stifled a yelp. Come out wherever you are," Miss Potter sang, brandishing the silver claw and circling the room. The skin tree teetered back and forth. When it tipped toward the stove again, Mia pushed up with everything she had, and the tree finally toppled, its skins falling with it. The top of the tree knocked the pot from the stove, and the skins landed on the flames. They started to smoke. "My coats!" Miss Potter screamed. She ran and swept the smoldering skins off the stove, stomping out the fire. A great cloud of smoke billowed to the ceiling, darkening the room. It stung Mia's eyes and tickled her lungs, but the smell filled her with hope. The fire extinguished, Miss Potter ran, coughing toward the front door. Mia followed like a shadow, careful to keep clear of the silver claw in the woman's hand. When the door flew open, Mia shot under the woman's skirt and between her feet toward freedom. Her tail brushed Miss Potter's ankle, and the woman screamed. A taw struck Mia's muzzle. A heel stabbed her tail. Everything became a tangle of legs and skirts and shrieks. Mia managed to slip out into the open, but found she was still inside. Her nose was no longer pointed toward the door. "Rah!" Miss Potter screamed. There came a whistling through the air, and Mia bounded away just before the silver claw could slice off her ear. She slipped into the first shadow she could find and cowered. "Where did you go?" Miss Potter hissed. In the shadows, Mia caught her breath. She'd been so close, but now Miss Potter was between her and the door. If she tried to escape, the woman would swing the silver claw, and that would be that for Mia. "I believe that little devil purposely set my kitchen on fire." Miss Potter stalked around the room, snarling to herself. "Now, where is she?" Mia watched the woman's heels dab around the room. She hoped with every beat of her heart for a clear path to the open door. Miss Potter kicked furniture, flipped over chairs, and whipped the tablecloth to the floor, huffing, searching. Mia cowered as Miss Potter bent at the hips with a grunt, peering under the sink, the table, the cabinet. "Aha," she said, crouching near the bookcase. "Found you." She seized the tail that stuck out from the shadows and gave it a tug. Before Miss Potter realized she was pulling on Mr. Todd's tail, Mia bounded toward the open door. But just as she was about to leap outside, her nose smooshed against something soft, something invisible, and it bounced her backward. Mia stared in shock. There was nothing in the doorway, but she couldn't pass through it. Had Miss Potter already trapped her in a story? Had Mia struck the border of the page? "Thank goodness," Miss Potter said, tossing Mr. Todd aside. "The screen caught you." "Screen?" Mia squinted at the entrance, and she saw the silver sticks, as tiny as hairs, making squares the size of bugs' eyes. Her heart sank. Miss Figgs had warned her. For all of Mia's trickery, humans were cleverer by a landslide. A sharp heel stomped on Mia's tail. Her yelp was cut short when a rope slipped around her throat, jerking her upward until she dangled before the naked face of Miss Potter. "Monstrous thing," the woman spat. Mia's eyes watered. Her legs twitched helplessly. She couldn't breathe. Miss Potter kicked open the screen and howled Mia, dangling by her neck outside. "I never should have trusted a fox," the woman said. She tossed the rope's end around a stick that stuck out from the dance slide, just like the one that held the rabbit's skin. Mia stopped struggling as the lights in her eyes began to fade. Her last thought before everything went dark was that she didn't even get to say goodbye to her siblings. Somewhere in the antler wood, leaves rattled without wind. The little one shifted her paws, making sure her skin was still on tight. No such thing as stealing eyes, she told herself. No such thing as three tall things with no fur. No such thing as watercolor nightmares. "Wait," the beta said. "Is Mia okay? She didn't die, did she?" "Patience," the storyteller said. The little one was really starting to hate that word. "Hey," the third kid said to the fifth, "your fur is pretty soft. I wonder if Miss Potter will come humming for you tonight." The shiver whipped the fifth kid, Mars, right up to his paws. "I'm hungry," he said. He curled his tongue, trying a yawn. "I mean sleepy. Good night." He waddled toward home. The third one grinned and stepped on a branch, snapping it. The sound startled Mars, who sprinted, leaped over a log, and then belly flopped in a bed of lilies. The alpha chuckled. "Good one. 4 little foxes." "We're ready for the next part," the beta said. "More than ready," the third said. The little one wanted to follow Mars all the way home, but she had to find out what happened to Mia. She just had to. She lay on her paws so they wouldn't be tempted to run. "We return to the boulder fields," the storyteller said, "to the forest edge, where Oli has been sitting, waiting for his mother to come and collect him."